So hello everybody and welcome. I'm Alison Hill, I'm chair of Cyclox, and I welcome you all and thank you for joining this session, which is really showing your support for cycling. We're really looking forward to hearing Tim Bearder and Pete Sudbury and Duncan Enright talking about their vision for the future of Cyclox, brilliant, of transport and Cyclox. And they've also prepared a film, which is really exciting, and we're looking forward to hearing. Obviously, climate emergency is right at the forefront of our minds with the COP26 finishing last weekend. And we've got a health crisis from problems of physical activity and terrible air pollution, and also our roads are full of cars. So cycling is a major part of the solution to all those problems. As Boris Johnson said in Gear Change 1 year on, you can't keep trying to fit more cars and vans into the same road and pretending it will work. There has to be new solutions. And what I'm hoping is we will hear about that today from the cabinet leaders who are responsible for transport. So I'm going to the agenda will be that we will see the film, and each of the cabinet members will be talking about elements of the aspects of transport that they are responsible for, and then there'll be a Q&A. The whole meeting will close at 8:15, and we'll move straight into the Cyclox AGM, which is clearly people who aren't members don't need to stay, but you'd be very welcome to stay if you want to, with closure at 8:45. So if I could hand over now to Tim, Pete, and Duncan, and
okay, so yeah, we spent a day or so, well, moments of days or so, trying to put together a little video for you, because partly that's what I do, making videos, and we thought it might be a good juncture to sort of all get together and demonstrate how we feel. I did realise though that we have made this wonderful video, and there's not a single bike in it, which is a massive faux pas for a cycling organisation. But we do all have bikes. In fact, Pete, you turned up for the Wallingford filming on your bike, but I wouldn't let him put it in it because it's just very difficult with expensive cameras to be moving around. But anyway, without further ado, I shall share my screen and play you the video. Here we go.
It's time we got really honest about the climate emergency. We're not in control here, and we're at that stage now where things become crystal clear, and it is crystal clear that all we have to do to get to climate hell is to carry on exactly as we are for another 10 years. I think that's why the people here in Wallingford and around Oxfordshire voted for me, and they voted for progressive politicians, because they expect us to take the decisions needed, the tough decisions needed, to change the trajectory away from a world that we really don't want to be in. Boris Johnson's spokesman was very keen on the news the other night to emphasise personal choice in his reasons for flying home rather than taking the train. She's right. We do have a choice. We have a choice between continuing to trash the planet, leaving it in a state even our children cannot fix, whether to continue with the mass extinction that we've started, or whether to save the other creatures that live on this planet. In order to help us to do the right thing, Oxfordshire County Council commissioned a report from the best scientists in Oxford. And the report's conclusions are really quite clear. The biggest source of emissions in Oxfordshire is transport. And we need to avoid travelling when we can. We need to shift to much more sustainable modes of transport, and we need to improve the modes of transport that we use. So now we know what to do, we just need to get on and do it.
Here in the Wheatley Division, the residents realised
that unrestrained growth without any of the infrastructure to support it was putting incredible pressure on the schools, the surgeries, and making it impossible to look after the roads we've already got. It costs about £40 million every year just to maintain our roads in Oxfordshire. And to do that job, government give us a mere £10 million. That is a massive black hole. But to make matters worse, we're also expected to build about £1 billion worth of new roads over the next 10 to 15 years, and we can't even afford to maintain the ones we've got. This situation is completely unsustainable, it's undesirable, and it has to stop.
Here in Witney, people really depend on cheap and reliable bus services to get around, and they're frustrated that services aren't good enough. If you're older and you've given up your car maybe, or if you're younger and you can't drive, then that's what you need to be able to get around. But what we also know we need is much better infrastructure for cycling and walking. It's a much healthier way to get about, it's cleaner, it's cheaper, and it's accessible to everybody, and it needs big improvement. So if we get this right, it's going to be really good in a number of ways. First, for our health, the cut in pollution is going to be quite dramatic, but also we'll be living more active lifestyles. Second, it'll be great for business on our high streets, for example, and if we cut traffic, it'll be really good for efficiency for our economy. And third, we want to see an improvement for the climate, and that means turning some of the public space that's currently devoted to cars and lorries over to you and me and have more beautiful and green places to live. So if we do things differently, it can make a big difference.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. As Cabinet members of the Oxfordshire Fair Deal Alliance, we will be doing everything that we can to make transport much more environmentally sustainable.
That means reprioritising money away from major road building schemes and instead investing that money into active transport.
Yeah, and what we want to do then is to invest in and design the kind of well-supported public and active transport infrastructure that we know we need in the county, and so we have clean, safer and more affordable ways of getting around.
There you go. I haven't got a chance to read that at the end. So yeah, that's our mission statement basically there. And we've got this unique situation, and it is unique because Oxfordshire has never not had a Tory leadership on the county. And in May, that changed. And we've now got Liberal Democrat, me, we've got Green, Pete, and we've got Labour, Duncan. And we are working seamlessly together as a triumvirate of highway specialists. So I don't know exactly what the other guys, if they prepared anything, but I think we're going to just sort of speak a little bit about things that really particularly interest us. Shall I kick off, guys, or do you anyone want to go first? So I think what I'd like to focus on for you is talking about what I sort of briefly raised in that video. And not because I don't care about all the other things which I am obviously passionate about, but the finances on this, it is really quite difficult, and that's understating it massively. We've been hobbled by central government, who've cut the funding to local government, and that really damages our autonomy and hobbles us and makes it very difficult to actually do anything. You see Wales deciding they're not going to build any new road schemes and they're going to prioritise all their money into active travel. We don't have that money in the first place. All we can really do is when government got pots of cash, and there's more strings attached to that than Charlotte's Web in terms of timeframes and when we've got to do things and how we've got to do things. And that's why you've seen in the city some of the things happening in orders that you wouldn't necessarily have predicted. But without that money, we have very little to do. And as I said, the roads cost about 40 million, and we get 10 million. That's so you've very little to deal with, and we have statutory responsibilities to maintain certain roads so they're safe, bridges to maintain, all this kind of stuff, and anything on roads is incredibly expensive, and so there isn't like pots of money to do what we know we need to do. So I'll leave it there and I'll let the others take up from that. Pete, you're muted.
Okay, so I represent the Wallingford Division, and I live in Woodcote. So that's about as far south as you can get and not be in Reading. And it's in many ways, it's the opposite pole of the county from Banbury, actually, in so many ways. And it's pretty rural, or at least it used to be. And it is the epicenter for vast amounts of house building. So just up the road from Wallingford, there's Didcot, and Didcot's going to add 12 to 15,000 houses. Oh, and it's getting a nice bypass to bring stuff through from the A34, just in case we thought that there was any room on the roads anyway. So actually, oddly, active transport and buses are a no-brainer around where we are, because there is no conceivable road building scheme that will allow everybody to jump in their car in the morning. It just doesn't, you can't imagine getting the money for it. You can't imagine being daft enough to build it. Because among other things, you need to build another bridge across the Thames. And we all know that everyone in this room will be dead by the time you get a bridge built across the Thames in the length of time it takes. So actually, I had an interesting time campaigning, because when I said what we need to do is get everyone who possibly can walking, cycling and taking the bus, so that the people who do need to use cars, and there are many of those in the country, can do that, can get out on the road and get to work. That's part of it. The other part, of course, is climate. There is this lovely, actually, our government is really keen on the idea. All you do is decarbonize electricity, electrify everything. And everyone then, instead of having 2 or 3 or 4 petrol cars on their drive, they have 2 or 3 or 4 electric cars on their drive. Of course, electric cars make just the same traffic jams. And they also have a significant resource footprint, even if you make them with completely zero carbon electricity. There is no possible way that a world of 10 billion people in 2-car families is sustainable. It trashes the environment just as effectively as using fossil fuels, just in a different way. So the other thing we need to think about, and this probably annoys people in Oxford, actually Oxford itself is only responsible for 10% of the county's transport emissions. The rest are in the periphery, not surprisingly, because the journeys are much, much longer. There are fewer people, but they drive much further. And so any solution that just decarbonizes Oxford is sweating the small stuff. We need to be taking out the long journeys in the countryside. At the very least, we need to have all the radial roads that come into Oxford need park and rides, not at the end of them, so you drive a long way and take the bus for a short way, but all the way along them. So people drive or walk or cycle a short distance, then get on a bus for the majority of the journey. So that's my contribution to the way the world needs to go. I had an electric car myself. I had a Tesla. I did quite well in a consulting job I did, and I decided to be an early adopter of electric vehicles, because one of the things I do is I always try things out before I would suggest anybody else does it. So I did vast amounts of retrofitting my house to make it more economical, just to see how much hassle it is, and it is a lot. And I got an electric car that got stolen at the beginning of lockdown, the first lockdown, and burnt out. So I thought, okay, so I'm a green. So if you're green, your next car's electric. The one after that's a bicycle. So I have an e-bike, and I flog up and down on that. And it's interesting. It's extremely dangerous, or it feels dangerous. I cycle down the 4074, which is listed as a cycling route. There is an element of, are you feeling lucky every time I go down that? So I've had people, I'm driving a third of the way out in the lane, and somebody actually overtakes me in my own lane with cars coming the other way. That sort of insane entitlement that drivers have. So actually, I cycle right down the middle of the lane and make them go past. And every now and then someone hammers on their horn and flicks a few signs at me, and I flick a few back. But that's the problem. The problem is, if everybody in Woodcote decided I'm going to cycle to Wallingford, some of them wouldn't make it. And that's not good enough. And we need a solution for that, as well as all these nice cycleways and quick ways and everything else in Oxford. We need solutions that work right out in the rural areas. Here endeth the lesson.
Right, thank you very much, Pete. Thanks, Tim. Oh, and Tim, thanks for doing that video. I actually watching it back, it's not as bad as I thought it was. It's great. So I live out in Witney, and first of all, I should say we're not crazy here. We're not out of sync either. I have to say the government is putting money behind this kind of transition to more active and public transport, but that's part of our problem really. We've inherited a situation where we've got a little pot here, a little pot there, little bits of money to do little bits of things, but not a coherent strategy. And so one of the things that's happening right at the moment is that we're knitting this together into a sort of longer term shift, a really quite radical shift, which we know we're all going to have to go through. And when I say we all, I mean the whole planet, not just Oxfordshire, but Oxfordshire is the bit we're responsible for. And there are some things that are helping us. So e-bikes, interestingly, are a bit of a game changer, I think. I live in Witney, and when we say everybody should get on bikes, we know that everybody can't get on bikes. And I have to say I would be one of the number of people who would feel daunted by the idea of cycling into Oxford and back every day on a regular bike. But on an e-bike, it becomes much more accessible to much more of us. And we don't all need to get out of our cars. We need those who can get out of their cars to get out of their cars. And we need to stop there being barriers to cycling and to using the bus. And we need to make them attractive and affordable and cost-effective options. And that's where the shift comes. So when people think it's not worth my while getting in the car because I've got these great alternatives, we'll know we're winning. And we'll begin to get that sort of virtuous shift to other modes of transport. So e-bikes give me the range I need to be able to get into Oxford. Even that's not true for everybody, but if we can make it the case that there are mobility hubs, there are places where you can go which are rich in transport options, which are within striking distance of where you live, and suddenly we have a transport network that really works. So we quite attracted all of us, I think, to this idea of 15-minute neighbourhoods. Well, 20 minutes if you push it, maybe, but people being within 15 or 20 minutes of somewhere that is going to be a capable transport hub that allows them to get where they need to get is what we're trying to achieve across the county. And that means, for example, near us, we're building what was in the old administration a park and ride at Ensham. Park and ride at Ensham seems a bit odd, doesn't it, really? You can see how it might work. But what if that was a transport interchange? And in fact, you could cycle from Witney, or you could even walk from Ensham to this transport interchange and be able to get a range of different services that connected you up to a bus to the hospital, a bus to various different parts of Oxford, not just the centre of Oxford, a bus to Banbury, a bus to Chipping Norton. Maybe it's also a place where the nippers, you can stimulate community bus services, which will bring people in from the villages to that point. So they can then get on a shuttle, which will take them to Hamborough Station, to Oxford Parkway, so they can go on holiday to Paris, or they can go on a work trip to Moscow. They can really use cycle and bus as the enabler to get long distance, short distance, to live our lives the way we want to live them. We can then start thinking about solutions for things like freight. So within the city, we're already trialling a number of cycle freight options, which are quite exciting. We know across the county that that's not going to be realistic for a period at least, but you could see a way in which these interchanges might also be used for freight exchange onto smaller and smaller vehicles. So gradually what we're doing is reducing the number of private vehicle journeys, or the length of those journeys as well, in order to allow us to use active walking and cycling options and public transport, buses, taxis, railways, to get everywhere that we need to go and to make our lives work. So that's our vision and our picture. And we have to use all of the little bits of pots of money that we get from here, from there and everywhere. We also have to change the way that our council plans for its transport in order to move inexorably towards zero carbon transport, because that's where we know we need to get to. And let me just remind you again, that's not something that everybody can do today. We can't get everybody to switch out of their car today. The way we live our lives will change in shape, but not quick enough for everybody to drop car usage. But if enough people shift today, tomorrow there'll be better options by bus and by cycle. We need to make cycling safe and available and effective and efficient, and an option which is realistic and preferred. And that's where we're headed.
So there you go. You've got 3 councillors from 3 different parties, and we all ride bikes. I went in from Wheatley, where I live, I am now, to County Hall today and back again on my bike. And you know, so I think that is a step change. That's what something in the gear change report that government just came out with. You know, if you're designing these schemes, you have to be a cyclist yourself. And I think it's a step change for the county. I think can't imagine as visionary in some respect that Councillor Constance was. She might be a keen cyclist on the weekend, but
no, she actually stated that she would never be seen dead on the bicycle at several points in the last administration.
Okay, so there you go. So now, so I think we have the recipe here, and I think now's the time for you to take questions, I guess.
Can I just start by asking a question from Annette, who unfortunately can't be here? She says, as mobility as a service was mentioned in the recently approved LCTP, I'd like to ask if they have any plans to introduce a managed bike share or e-bike share scheme in Oxford as part of their wider strategy, like the ones in Leicester and Exeter, etc. Yeah.
So in fact, we've already been approached by some companies that want to do this with electric bikes, and we got a huge amount of competition, as Danny, who I believe is on the call today, has been pointing out for space. Because what we don't want to do is give over more space to the of the pavements to clutter up with extra things. And we've got this e-scooter trial that's currently doing a bit of that. So we just wanted to get the e-scooter trial finished and then assess where that's going to land, and then yes, absolutely is something we want to bring in the future and see how it works. And just on the space on our high streets, they are on pavements at the moment, which obviously conflicts with walkers and pedestrians. The long-term goal, something that Duncan has advocated, is to remove car parking spaces and put them there, which is a win-win, because you get less cars coming into the centre of town, and you get the apparatus moved out away from pedestrians. So that's something that we want to do. But when we do, it's about the council raises about £50,000 per car parking space in the centre of Oxford, right? And it's basically living on life support from this money. So it's very difficult to wean off the council from huge revenue. But we are doing that. We are genuinely brave enough to do that. And the cost of removing the car parking spaces in Broad Street is about £200,000 to £400,000. But we are going to do that, and we're going to do that next year. And that's sort of emblematic, really. I think that's, it's a small thing, the scheme thing of Oxfordshire. And people in Bicester and Banbury might go, well, hang on, but it's a World Heritage Site, and it's a statement that's saying that we are going to do this. We're not going to have a car park on our World Heritage Site. This is something that I've been railing against for probably a decade or more. It's just so ridiculous that we have a car park there, and all this conflict with cars and pedestrians and bicycles that are all trying to use that beautiful space. So we're doing that as like a first step to say, look, this is what we can achieve and we want to do it in our market towns as well. So it's just not the city.
Yeah, I'm desperately searching for cooperative solutions. So I'm a co-op councillor as Labour and Co-op, and I really like the idea of having. I like the idea of car clubs, for what they were, bike clubs, which use shared resources to and have shared ownership in those things. I think that adds a certain element of, I don't know, belonging to it, which I think will be valuable in the future. So common purpose, at least. So if anybody knows of any co-op bike clubs or for that matter, car clubs as well, for electric cars, so that people stop owning cars but instead see it as something that they might use when they need it. I think I'd be really interested in that, particularly if it had this common ownership element to it.
And one other thing to say on that is that we, through a government grant during lockdown, we've bought 10 e-cargo bikes that we've Pedal and Post are going to be administering for us, and you can actually hire that or use it on a long-term rental for your business, so that we, the council are actually facilitating alternatives to, if we're sort of closing off streets and that kind of thing. People say, well, how do I get through? How do I get through a zero emission zone, that kind of thing? Well, we are offering, a chance to get an alternative, and that's just the start of where I think we need to go with that. We're looking at other ways to expand that out.
Thank you. Claire Farley, if you'd like to unmute yourself. Early on, there was a mention about funding, and Claire wondered, well, over to you, Claire.
Yeah, I was interested to know Greater Cambridge Partnership for their transport seem to be very successful at bidding for government funding for their schemes. They've had, I think, quite a few millions, hundreds of millions, I think, already, and seem to be likely to get quite a few more hundreds of millions. They've got guided buses, they've got more bike routes, they're extending it out into the villages around Cambridge, just as, we need to extend our cycling facilities out to Witney and Ensham and Wheatley, Woodstock, all the W's really. Are you going to be ready to apply for all the funding that's available from the government for Oxfordshire?
Yeah, we're applying for all sorts, I have to say. So it can be a bit scattergunny in the sense that we have these little pots of money, or well, sometimes quite large pots of money, and they don't necessarily knit together terribly well, which is why we're trying to make this into sort of more coherent plan. One of the stipulations about the larger pots of money is that they must be accompanied by growth, and we're having a debate around the council, to be honest, and across the county, I'm sure, about Oxfordshire Plan. If you look up oxfordshireplan.org, you'll see that's a combined effort by the county and the city and the districts to try to plan out to 2050 what our county is going to be like. And I'm sceptical whether the level of growth which we predicted in the past is achievable, never mind sort of astronomical levels of growth in the future, meaning, anyway, putting that to one side. We do have one project between Witney and Oxford, which involves building bus lanes and really good cycle lanes, actually. And what we're trying to do with all of the schemes that we've inherited is to turn them as far as we possibly can towards supporting active travel and public transport. It's not always possible to do that 100%, but we really want to try and make the most of that where possible. And our future bids will be for exactly that. We want to make sure that we're providing a network across the county and within our towns and cities, as well as in between them, a really great cycle network and really safe as well, LTN 120 compliant. And we're also investing in our buses as far as we possibly can. I've just come from a meeting where we've been talking about our bus service improvement plan, actually, and its impact on one particular area in Oxford. And that's critical to what we want to do.
I think Chris Church had the first question. Chris, do you want to unmute yourself?
Just on a little bit.
Thank you.
Go on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to hear the vision, and it's good to hear there's a lot going on. But we already have a lot on the table in terms of your draft local transport and connectivity plan, which has already gone through Cabinet and can be consulted on soon. In there, you've got two pretty ambitious targets. One is to reduce vehicle journeys by 25% by 2030, and the second is connecting Oxford. Both of those, I would suggest to you, are going to be extremely controversial with certain quite vocal parts of the community. My question is actually, how are you planning to communicate this? There's a lot of groups who would happily help you, but we need to know what kind of actual communication strategy. Because if the Oxford Times just picks up that on the first day of the consultation and runs a story about the war on motorists ramps up another 6 stages, we're all going to be on the back foot. What are you going to do to sell this to people who are concerned about climate change, but who maybe think this is all a bit too radical?
Yeah, so that was one of the first things that we identified when we took over, that there was no overarching plan for all this stuff, and it was all piecemeal and you know, bitty. We've got the ZEZ, we've got the workplace parking levy, we've got the bus filters, we've got the quick ways and quiet ways, we've got LTNs, so on and so forth. And there's no overarching plan, and that needed to change, because if we're going to get this communication piece right, what we have to do is have a reason and a destination. So we need to say something we can pin on the wall, say that is where we're going, and that is why we want to do all this, and here are the stages and the timelines of how we get there. Is that's so crucial to get everybody all singing from the same hymn sheet. We need that narrative. So we have asked our officers to go away and actually come up with a timeline to get that piece of work done, and then we're gonna work out how we communicate that to the people, and that will involve lots of this kind of thing, which is like communicating with interest bodies, interest groups. We've done a huge amount of work with taxis, masks, you know, people who are anti as well. You know, it's not just the pro people, and it will involve a lot of work, and undoubtedly there will be a huge amount of noise. But if we've got that nirvana, which we know it will be if we get this right, then I think it's logical for people to then come on board. But what they can see the logic in it, if you see what I mean.
Just looking at the questions, someone's put, is there a disjunction between the power of technical officers and councillors? And I think we'd say the answer to that is no. I think we had, when we first got here working as a pack, we had some fairly bruising encounters over things like roundabouts that had a bike lane on a bit and then didn't bother, and so on. And actually, after about a couple of months, I think we said, look, guys, you're the experts. In fact, I think it was my experience in the NHS is that there are always rules for why you can't do things that make sense. Yeah, some idiot's written a rule that says you can't do this, even though it makes sense. And the trick of working in the public sector is to find a way of not quite breaking that, just getting around it. And that's what really experienced, skilled people do. It's what I spent my entire life doing as a medical director. And at that point, we got a complete flip from them, and they came back and they said, we've heard you, we understand. It's going to take us a while to work through how we do it, but we get what the vision is. And so I do think we have a group of certainly the senior officers who really do get this and find it quite exciting, and understand that, you know, you just can't build roads to get out of this. I think there are probably some of the more junior officers who are still taking a policy down that says for every house you need 6 car parking spaces, and putting that, you know, putting that in to applications. But that's our problem. We need to review all the policies too. But I don't think, I think we do have a remarkable degree of, actually it's quite exciting. There is excitement about this because it is so obviously the right thing to do.
Duncan, do you want to talk about maybe the timeline a bit like what we're actually gonna do in this with connecting Oxford and things?
Blimey. Dare I? Well,
that was the hospital pass, I think, Duncan.
Yeah, well, look, the next council elections are in 2025. Sorry about that. Next council elections are in 2025, and we need to have moved the meter by then for a couple of reasons. One is because you'll all vote us out. Fine. But actually, more importantly than that, to be honest, we need to really make this shift if we're to do anything about the climate emergency. And then the other thing is that we know that there's a head of steam right now behind this, and we want to make the most of that too. I take the point about it being very difficult to communicate, and you're quite right. And although the cognoscenti know well about connecting Oxford, actually, it's not as well known as we think and on the doorstep. And I think we do need to describe what it is that we're going to try to do, people, not least because it's going to make it more inconvenient, not impossible, more inconvenient to drive around town. And we also know we need to learn a great deal before it starts to be implemented, because there are people who will need to drive around town, carers, people who drive for a living. You get the picture. There's lots of sort of unknowns that we need to try and unearth as far as possible before we implement anything. And then we also need to make sure that what looks great on a map or across a city or across a town works in every little part of that town, in every neighbourhood. To do that, you need proper engagement so that you get the local feedback, which makes things work really well. Now, we haven't had a history as a council, I think, of being particularly brilliant at consultation and engagement, let's say. So, and actually, I don't think any councils do it perfectly. But what we have done is launch this new platform called Let's Talk Oxfordshire, which helps somewhat. It's a good way of, at least, of sort of gathering broad inputs to things. But what's more important is that we've really beefed up since we got in the comms and engagement team. And although they're still gathering grip, if you like, I think that they have a real potential to change the way that we do things, so that what we're talking about is well socialized, people understand what's in the plans, but also that they have plenty of opportunities, lots of different ways of getting in touch and contributing to things. I think probably it looked worse than I expected when we came in May, because we've had the pandemic. And so there are a lot of the sort of face-to-face and natural ways in which people communicate and share ideas have been unavailable to us for quite a long time. And understandably, that caused a lot of frustration. Also, as we've come out of the pandemic, as traffic levels have risen, they've done so in a rather unpredictable way, to be honest. So we still know that bus numbers are still well down on where they were previously, with some sectors up and some sectors down. It's a really mixed picture, to be honest. Same with cycling numbers, same with traffic numbers, cars. So we're dealing with a number of uncertainties, but the top of the list is people have, all of our plans need reconsulting, re-engagement, helping to talk to people again. We've just run a little exercise on the whole priority, this sort of strategy for the county council, where we've used not citizens' juries, but focus groups of young people, older people, and electronic methods of consulting as well. And it's been one of the bigger efforts of that kind that the county's done recently. And while not perfect, that has, we saw the results of that today, and they were the beginnings of an emergence of this new approach to democracy that we really want to try and get through in the county. Now, new approach to democracy, consultation, engagement doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree, far from it, but it will allow us to make better decisions based on richer information and input from a wider range of people. And it will also mean, hopefully, that people will feel like that at least they've had a chance to be listened to. And an awful lot of the frustration that we've come across over the last few months, I would say, I don't know if the other two agree with me, is people feeling like they've been ignored. Even if they don't agree with what happens, if they feel like they've been listened to, I think people feel much better about it. I know I do. And the not being listened to extends to county councillors. So it's a cultural thing that we're changing, and changing slowly, and I hope that you will see that it improves over months to come.
Okay, thank you. Joe Bolt has a few questions, and can I hand over to you, Joe, to choose one?
Thank you, Andy. Yes, actually, just to follow on from what you were saying there, Duncan, actually going back to one of my questions was that I've spent quite a lot of time over the last, well, since the end of lockdown, really working with a lot of local residents on a particular junction. And I'm not going to ask about that one in particular, but it is pertinent to what you were just saying right now about consultation and feeling as if we actually have an opinion that's valid. So we ended up, this is the Bardwell Road outside Dragon School, where the national cycle route crosses a minor side road. Priorities were changed against the cycle route because I appreciate for equal junction not equal. And so they prioritised the road because of the traffic. It did not prioritise the national cycle route. Now, we did have a meeting. I know decisions are made for lots of different reasons, but we ended up with a meeting with all the local residents associations, all the local councillors, including the county and city local councillors, the cycling champions at council, at city and at county, everybody, all of those people, Cyclox and Sustrans, we came up with a very good plan. All of those people agreed, and we also had potential to fund those changes to prioritise that cycle route. It was all turned down, and we don't feel at all consulted, and we just feel as if an officer has made a decision, which to me actually makes me question what our priorities are. Are we prioritising school children walking and cycling to school on a national cycle route over a minor side road where vehicles cycle? There are lots of issues surrounding that particular junction, and from my point of view, and I would argue all of those local residents who were all on side, it doesn't feel to me like a democracy, and it doesn't feel to me as if we've got our priorities right.
Yeah.
Perhaps somebody else could answer that one.
So I think I was there. I think, or at least
you were, Tim. You were.
I was there, and yeah. Sorry, it's taken so long. So we don't want to get down a rabbit hole on that.
Sure, but there are quite a lot of issues surrounding that one, and one of them is the priority of road users and the hierarchy of road users, I should say. And I feel that's an example where perhaps we've got that wrong.
Yeah,
we could actually be using road layout and highway plans to actually try to change behaviour, rather than actually designing our road and our pedestrians and so on, our routes according to what the behaviour is. We shouldn't be prioritising roads because lots of parents drive to the Dragon School. We should be prioritising roads in order to stop that behaviour and prioritise a national cycle route, in my opinion. Otherwise, we're never going to get these changes that we need. And that, to me, I'm really passionate about that one junction, not because of that junction, but because to me it's symbolic of a really big picture. And if we can't do that one right, then when it's simply a matter of painting the road, I appreciate there's a bit more to it than that, but fundamentally that's what it is. If we can't do that right, what are we talking about?
Yeah, so ODS, who look after the road maintenance in the city, did a line refresh, and they went with the current guidelines, which would put the priority in the way it's now been repainted. When it was four-way, wasn't it, before? So I've spoken to the director, and he's issuing a deviation from the current standards, and we're going to get it back to how it was. And I know that's not how the scheme that you've come up with, would have been a further improvement. Mm-hmm. And I guess that speaks to some of what Pete was saying before. They are, the officers under a previous administration are doing things a certain way. My route to down the Horsepath Road we got the new sports ground has been built there, and that's got car priority. The cyclists should have, if people are cycling to a new sports ground, they should have cycle priority across that route. It's so frustrating. Again, you come to the BMW and they've got like those long, smooth, curving exits and entrances into there. So the cars are fine, they can come out nicely, but the bikes, are in peril.
So why is it that officers have got this, are able to do whatever they decide they're going to do, even when it's contravening the highway code and all of these guidelines that we're now supposed to be abiding by, and LTM1 and so on? How is it that one or two officers are able to make those decisions when all of you and all of us and all of the residents associations, everybody else involved, is actually trying to abide by the guidelines? How can they get away with that? What's democratic about that?
Well, they're putting it back for a start. That's so. It was just the people doing the lines. They've got a rule book, and it's a dated rule book, and they got that wrong.
So we need to change that for future for everybody, not just this junction, right?
So yes, the answer is we need to change the rule book. I get particularly annoyed by signs that say cyclists dismount.
Oh, furious about that.
Because you've never seen a sign saying car drivers get out of your car. And frankly, until you do, then cyclists shouldn't have to dismount. I think we do. We have been surprisingly ruthless. And I think the answer is we need to find the policy, and we need to rewrite it for everybody. So it's absolutely clear. You always give the bike priority.
And we did come up with a plan with Sustrans and in consultation with everybody else who's involved, but that didn't see, and I appreciate you've done that, Tim, but actually it doesn't feel like the consultation democratic. It's taken over 2 years now to get to this. It's just ridiculous.
We've only been in charge 6 months, and I'm already going to get it put back to how it was. And I know that's
thank you.
Perfect, but I've got to talk about capacity, because we have a really skeletal crew of officers who we've all focused on the big ticket items, which is connecting Oxford and the LTNs and all this kind of stuff. And they basically don't have the headspace to do anything else. And every time, so this was the Jericho LTN, I wanted to resurrect that immediately. But it meant deprioritizing other stuff, because we've only got so many staff. So that's why your scheme, which isn't necessarily funded to the level it would be required, hasn't gone ahead, because it would take away officer time for other schemes. But on policies, they do absolutely need completely rewriting. And if we took a big example of that, we've got 11,000 houses going to be built on greenbelt land around the southeast of Oxford, right? That's a town the size of Didcot. And as it currently stands, all those developers and most of that land is being promoted by the colleges will have car parking spaces. So just one of those is land north of Bayswater Brook, is the development site out behind Barton Park. All of that behind Barton Park and Barton, all the way down to the crematorium there, if anyone's familiar with the Bayswater Road, is going to have 1,100 houses on it, 1,100 cars. So we're trying to strip out cars from the centre of Oxford, but the rule book says that they can all have cars. And so we absolutely have to rewrite the rules, but that's not something we can do overnight. And we're also sitting in a tiered structure with the national planning policy framework overriding all of what we're trying to do.
Thank you. We better move on, but thanks, Joe. Catherine, I think, has lined up the next questioner.
Inez, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, sorry, the other Catherine. Yeah.
Oh, that was ages ago. I think we talked about it quite a bit.
That
was about.
That's fine. Okay.
Yep. No, that's fine. Let's move on.
Okay, thank you. Hazel? Hazel, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, we've got two. Steve put one about climate adaptation, and I've got one about park and rides. I'm a little concerned councillors seem to be big fans of park and ride, because in fact they generate more traffic. They don't reduce it. And even what Duncan was saying, these kind of bus terminals, you don't put them in the middle of a rural area. You put them in the towns and villages, and you improve your cycling infrastructure along the radial roads. You don't try and siphon lots of people to drive to where they can get a bus, or even walk and cycle to where they can get a bus. You try and get them to cycle into Oxford. And to do that, you need to get people more interested and more familiar with e-bikes, which have been mentioned. And you wanted to ask about climate adaptation.
Can I answer that one first?
Mm-hmm.
I live in Wallingford. I live in Woodcote. If I cycled to Oxford on my e-bike, I would be half dead when I got there. The idea that people from peripheral places will cycle 20 odd miles is complete nonsense. And I'm quite fit. So I really think we need to get real. We can expect people to cycle 5, 10, 15 minutes, but we can't expect them to cycle. It would take me well over an hour and a half probably.
So I think you agree.
And then I'd have to come back.
Take the bus.
I do take the bus. I take the bus from Woodcote.
Hazel, you're saying we want park and rides or mobility hubs, but further out that people can cycle to, and that's what you think as well, isn't it?
Yeah, except Pete seemed to be saying drive to. Cycle to is fine, but
I think
we need
some
people
people.
Parking, of course.
There are lots of people who are really quite old who live in villages who probably can't cycle, and actually there are some quite dangerous roads around villages.
Yes.
And so actually walking and cycling may not be safe. And I think we need to accept if there's a 2-3 mile journey in a car to get to a place where you take a bus rather than driving right into Oxford, that is a really good trade.
I don't think we're necessarily sort of talking across purposes here, though. I have to say. So park and ride, as it's been in the past, is not necessarily the greatest model, or they're not necessarily in the right places. I'd like to think that Witney Town Centre, for example, would be the primary mobility hub, if you like, for Witney, because apart from anything, you can get chips and coffee, and support local traders while you're at it. But there is, what do we do with the old park and rides? That's one question. And the answer is, well, they're better than than driving right into the middle of somewhere, and they were invented to stop people driving right into the middle of Oxford. Of course, that's the thing they were there to do, and they're still better than doing that, even though they're possibly, you know, not what we would want to have necessarily for forever. And actually, what I'd like to think is that our mobility hubs would make them less attractive for that, and we might want to reimagine them for something else. Thornhill doesn't act like a park and ride very much anymore, really, but it is quite a handy place for regional transport links via the airline service or via the Oxford Tube, for example, and could be an enabler and a connector. Water Eaton, of course, is really a place for connection to rail. That's what it is. It's not really a park and ride as it's currently used. So we need to kind of reimagine these spaces. I don't think we'll be building 1 million park and rides, and please don't get that idea that it's somehow our strategic aim to do that. What we'd like to do is have people walking and cycling as far as they can, relatively short distances or long distances if they're up to it, fantastic, to a place where they can then connect to public transport, which is itself incredibly well integrated and can allow them to do the journeys they want to do. Yes, Scott's mentioning that they should be refashioned as bus interchanges. I remember bus stations in the past, mind you, Pontefract bus station where I grew up was quite a scary place after dark. So we also have to be aware of those kind of worries, I suppose.
I mean, I'm a big fan of getting the buses, the flight buses, the Heathrows and the Gatwick buses to stop at the park and rides outside of town, so you haven't got them trundling into the centre of town. And they say, oh, it'll kill the bus services. No one will take the buses if you do that. And I'm thinking, well, if everyone who comes from a village or anywhere else in Oxfordshire has to come into like the Thornhill Park and Rides to get those buses, so why can't people in Oxford get a local electric Zebra, you know, in our new electric buses out? So well, they'll have to take their cases, and it's like,
okay. Next question.
Climate adaptation. Yeah. Could I just come in on my question? The County Council doesn't currently have an adaptation plan for climate change. Many other local authorities have got something, although sometimes they're very limited. Interesting examples would be the Glasgow City Region and Essex County Council. I wondered if the County Council would consider this for its next budget, because they've made the climate emergency a priority, but they do not have an adaptation plan. And after COP26, I would suggest that an adaptation plan is something we're going to need. What do you think?
You're muted, Pete.
If you plot carbon dioxide and put all the COPs on it, you get a beautiful, uninterrupted exponential. And in fact, if you didn't know that coincidence didn't imply causality, you'd assume that the COPs were actually working to accelerate carbon dioxide emissions. And in fact, of course, given that the biggest group of individuals there are from fossil fuel companies, that may indeed have been exactly what they are doing. So I agree with you. I think adaptation, certainly since I've been in post, I have said adaptation needs to be the very top priority, because I don't think our people are safe. I don't think we can say that we know what happens if there's a heat dome, if we get temperatures 5 degrees above anything we've ever seen for a week or two, or if we get 6 inches of rain over the entire Thames catchment like happened in Germany, or if we get, even if we get what happened in London, a month or two's rain in an hour. I don't think we know what's going to happen. So that is something I'm doing. I haven't put much in. What we've actually put in the budget is more about setting up the department that can do that, and getting the consultation, getting the expertise in to tell us how it can be done. But that will be an item for future budgets, because I agree. I think the light at the end of the tunnel is a rapidly accelerating train, and it's not very far away, and we really do need to get on with this.
Could we ask Catherine Miles to say question because she's got to move on.
Yeah, thank you very much. So it's really a question, the extent to which you are intending to be looking at the travel to schools as a priority for cycle infrastructure. It was only on Twitter the other day about the cycle lane that leads past the Europa school, and there are some schools that are basically not accessible by other means other than car or bus at the moment, but yet some villages that serve primary schools, so the Europa school is a great example, are actually relatively close by, and parents would be probably very happy for their children to cycle if appropriate infrastructure was there. So, to what extent are you looking at the residential nodal points for key schools and ensuring that children are able to safely get to and from them, to basically remove some of the school traffic from the roads? Thank you.
I mean, I think this is a massive thing, and I got caught out by being inadvertently sarcastic on Twitter, which is something you want to avoid doing if you don't want to sort of incur the wrath of the many. But I was pointing out, I was on the Cowley Road cycling into the centre of town, and there was just nobody, and it was because it was the holidays. It's very clear to everyone who's a cyclist, and that's most of you, that the traffic is just radically different in the cities and everywhere around our county when it's holidays as opposed to term time, and so we have to look at that, and we've started these things called school streets, and they rely on volunteers, and there's Windmill School up in Headington has run a very successful one. And I know one of our councillors, Rod Smith, who volunteers for that regularly, and she has to experience a huge amount of very vicious anger from motorists who are, their God-given right to travel through an area where there's loads of kids running around is impaired, and therefore they get very angry. But it's the right thing to do, and it's something we need to improve. Now, the Achilles heel of that scheme is that it is a volunteer-led scheme, and actually they're finding it very difficult to keep recruiting mums and others to maintain it. So I think our answer, and I think our answer for a lot of this stuff, is automated number plate recognition cameras, which the government tell us we're going to get in December. The right to apply for this. So I've already written to the Secretary of State and said we are really keen. We want to embrace this, and my kind colleagues today and the rest of the cabinet signed off a fairly substantial sum of money for us to be to embrace these and really be at the forefront of this, embracing this new technology when it comes in. And we're not getting speed cameras, but we're hoping, and we haven't been told specifically by government what we will get, but we will get cameras to do U-turns, box junctions, specific types of vehicles like blue badge holders and that kind of thing, weight restrictions. Those kind of details we'll be getting with these cameras. The government is saying that they won't get parliamentary time until March next year to sign off the first tranche of them nationally. So hopefully we will be in that first tranche with as many cameras as we can get, and then when we get these kind of cameras, we can say between certain hours only certain number plates, if any, can come down this street, and that will protect schools and stop parking outside schools. That's I haven't explored all the detail of that. This is brand new. I mean, in London, that actually some London boroughs are making huge amounts of money out of bus lane traffic enforcement and that kind of thing, but really in the shires, this new technology hasn't been explored in detail. So quite how we do it is up for grabs, and that's where the consultation comes in. But we hope to embrace that technology. Otherwise, it is quite an expensive and insoluble problem, but one we do recognise. While I wait for the next question, so someone was saying no, it's gone out of my head now what they were saying, but I had a pertinent point.
Catherine, do you have anybody in mind? Otherwise, Danny.
There are so many, as I was thinking, Danny.
Yeah. Danny, can you come up and ask a question about funding and connecting Oxford?
So both the LTCP and the BSIP have mid-2023 as the sort of timeline for connecting Oxford, or traffic filters to go in, which is obviously the point at which the shit is going to hit the fan and everything is going to have to happen. So when do you expect to find out from the BSIP bid whether you've got the funding for that? And when are you sort of going to, I guess, will you sort of immediately make an announcement about that or start the planning for that?
I'll start this off, Duncan, and you can come in on this one. I think you've got something to say about this. So this really does sit at the heart of everything we're doing, because this is where we get the funding from. We put in pro rata, you'd expect £25 million for a city like Oxford. We put in a £50 million bid, and a great deal of that money is infrastructure to make Connecting Oxford work. Connecting Oxford does require us to write to the Secretary of State as well, and we have to do all the consultation and awareness raising that is necessary to persuade the Secretary of State that it's possible. So the officers tell us that will be next year. It's take at least a year to do that work. Now, the bus companies are content with this, because what we have to do is we have to reduce the traffic in Oxford by 10%, increase the efficiencies of the buses by 10%. And that's how we're being judged. And they're saying they're not going to sign up to the Zebra bid, which is like a £36 million bid. They're not going to support our bid, and you have to get the bus operators to support your bid to government. They're not going to support it unless they see that 10% efficiency, okay? And so that is where we're all going. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we're trying to achieve that. And so in a timeline, we're likely to see it take about a year from now for the Secretary of State to sign off workplace parking levy and they get the Connecting Oxford in, and then when we're here in January about the Zebra bid, and then that will take about a year to put the business case, and then they start putting in the bids, put the order for the buses, and so it's about 2024 when the buses arrive. Duncan, do you want to take over?
It's not as fast as we'd want, is it? It is what it is. There are measures we can take in the meantime, and the key thing that we want to do, I think, is to get that comms and engagement stuff really good next year, so that we know that when these things are introduced, people know. As far as possible, we've got support for doing them, and we can start doing the pieces knowing that they're part of this bigger puzzle. Because up till now, it's all been a little bit here and a little bit there, and that's not quite good enough, and people haven't had the big picture in their mind. So certainly I haven't, I have to say. Because the key thing we want to have, of course, is behaviour change. We want people to be far more confident and able to cycle, and far more safe road conditions for people to feel confident to do so. And we want to drive up bus usage at the same time as well. So the physical measures shouldn't be the first thing that happens. They should come in the middle of a change in people's attitudes and behaviour, and that comes from far more than waiting for the kit and waiting for the powers and waiting for the traffic code changes, which is not to say that those things are unimportant and that we can just do this anyway. You know, hey, it's easy. Of course we can't. But I sincerely think that that there is value to those conversations beyond getting the schemes as right as they can be, and that is in changing people's attitudes and beginning to talk about these things in a different way. And the people on this call, it's not exactly preaching to the converted, but we are a particular group, aren't we? And we have I think everybody on the call will have a more attuned sense of what we're talking about here. But I think it's important that we engage as far as many people as possible in this conversation, so that they can get with the program, really get this really good feeling about the possibilities in the future. Because this is the thing, I think, the win is not just addressing the climate emergency, although that is critical. The win is a richer life. Your life will be better if we can stop cars hogging all the space, if we can start getting some of this space back for ourselves, if we can begin to think about living again. If we're enabled to live our lives with really good, efficient, cost-effective, affordable bus services, with safe and enjoyable cycling surfaces, it has other benefits, doesn't it? I mean, we really need to crack on with studying that as soon as we can. And we have inherited a council which isn't great at necessarily gathering together all of that energy and mobilizing all of that opinion. And we're really trying to change that, as well as having the rather sort of impatient wait for these pots of money that we know we need to put the kit in place, the electric buses and so on. And that's not the answer I'd like to give. I'd like to be able to say that we could just do it quicker, bluntly.
So we're coming to the end of your session. Thank you so much, Tim, Pete and Duncan. I just wondered if there are any last words you want to say to us all to really leave us feeling, I mean, I think all of us are kind of very, well, it's exciting, but it's also daunting. You know, you're not doing things fast enough, but is there something you would just like to finish off with before we move on to the AGM? Just starting with Pete.
Rome wasn't built in a day. This takes time, particularly the public sector takes time. The public sector is a highly inertial place, and you need to keep that. It's force times time that makes it move. And believe me, I've never met two other people who are quite as excited about applying the necessary force. And this is probably the best partnership I've ever worked in terms of just getting it done. So if you think we're not doing it enough, well, I'm exhausted, but we are not going to stop, partly because this is important. We have to get this right. We have to get this right for people's futures. We have to get this right for the climate. There are a lot of things actually there where "do not fail" is written across it in big letters. So we will not fail.
I feel like the man in the trebuchet, they fire against the wall in the hope they'll go over and then be able to fight and open the gate from the inside. Because, you know, I'm basically the fall guy for LTNs and all the other kind of stuff. But I enjoy it. And I think this is, you know, one day I might be splattered against the wall at the moment, but one day they'll put me on the plinth of the Martyrs Memorial and go, look, he was a man who pedestrianised Broad Street finally after decades. And
then we burnt him.
Yeah. Then I expect to be burned in the process. Yeah, but we've gone this whole meeting. We haven't mentioned our big flagship project, which is 20 miles an hour. That is the only place in the entire country that's gone, you know what? Every 30-mile-an-hour zone in a built-up area, we're going to make that 20 miles an hour. Like, and I said this to the you know, and we got our little hard hats on and we go to war over this. And the police, they got this guy, and he's the grumpiest man. He looks like Deputy Dog or something out of, you know, and I shouldn't say that. He is a really lovely guy. Yeah, but he's really grumpy. He's like that. And he's all right. I said, the Marston Ferry Road, that will be 20 miles an hour. And he went, what? What? I might not get that. I might not win on that one. I might not get that through. But it is a lot of fun, and you know, we are completely dedicated to this, and we are fighting every day to make it happen as soon as we possibly can. But it you know, there's a lot of things like the speed cameras won't work on 20-mile-an-hour roads. We have to get new ones. I'm like, right, get new ones. You know, it's a nightmare. So there's a lot of us stacked against us, but we're doing our absolute very best.
That's a lovely image to leave us with, Tim. You splattered against the castle walls, and I kind of feel much more like the kind of diplomat here in some ways. I guess I'm speaking from the point of view of somebody who hasn't lived a particularly sustainable life up till now. And here's an example. So I'm sorry, Councillor Hayward is left, by the way, because he knows a little bit about what this is like. My oldest daughter had profound disabilities, and so for a lot of time we were navigating quite a difficult transport challenge, which was getting her in a wheelchair around the place. So it gave you a real sort of attuned feeling for your local transport. Quality of pavements matters a great deal if you're bumping along a poor little girl in a wheelchair, and it's a pretty crummy wheelchair as well, actually, because I won't go into the detail. Anyway, but there's that element to it. Then there's also your reliance on cars to get where you need to go, because you need to load the wheelchair into the back of the car and the girl in the wheelchair into the back of a quite big car quite often, in order to be able to navigate your way around all sorts of things, including rather unforgiving hospitals with rather poor facilities for anybody coming into them, to be honest. And so that wasn't particularly sustainable. And I realized that it's not going to be possible for everybody to switch in, just to sort of wake up one morning and think, of course, I should be riding a bike and then getting on a bus or whatever. Yeah. So, but we need to be able to persuade people that this is our direction of travel and it is inexorable. This is the way we're going. And we will be going this way forever. And so this is something which also brings with it massive benefits. And there are really good things that can come out of this. Not least, if you absolutely need to be in a car, you'll have an awful lot less traffic to navigate. You'll be able to get from place to place more easily, because you'll only be competing with buses, hopefully. Anyway, so you've got that really good picture, and we need to persuade everybody, even those who can't hop on a bike, haven't got a bike, or can't use a bike, that this is all in the benefit of all of us, and all of it is something which is going to give us all richer lives.